Hello everyone. Now we move to the penultimate round of the Tata Steel Masters Tournament of 2024 and we'll look at a game between Alireza Firouzja and Ian Nepomniachtchi. Firouzja had the white pieces and he started with knight c3, knight f6, d4 and d5, bishop f4 and c5, e3, cd4 and ed4. So it's a bit like a Caro-Kann structure with the exchange variation. a6 and knight f3, bishop g4 and h3, bishop takes, queen takes, and knight c6, castles queenside and e6. So standard developing moves from both sides. And g4 going for the attack, bishop d6 trying to exchange some pieces, and bishop e3, queen a5, king b1 a prophylactic move, knight b4, bishop c1. Here it would be perfectly fine to just castle, even though the pawns look threatening and perhaps it seemed that a3 will push the knight back to c6 and then g5, knight e8 and h4 looks a bit daunting, but there is b5, a counterplay by black, and let's say knight a2 preventing b4 from coming with tempo, and there's rook b8. White is slightly better, but black can perfectly play this, no problems at all. It looks a bit scary though. Although Nepomniachtchi played rook c8, and this is slightly different because now after a3 and knight c6, there's still g5, knight to d7 and h4. It's quite similar to the previous line, but in that case black's king was castled safely and the rook had not been played to c8, and we saw that the rook should really be on b8 to support the b pawn. So this is not as accurate, and the next move here should be played b5. Just continue with that plan, knight a2 and then queen b6. White is better. White has some advantage, no doubt. Queen e3 to defend the pawn and then b4. But this would still be the best way to go. However, black played queen b6 immediately, and this is not as good because the b pawn really should be in front of the queen, threatening b4. Here there was a very interesting idea with rook h3. A rook lift, perhaps you're threatening that if the queen and the knight moves at some point of time, you can swing the rook across to the queen side. And it's important there is no knight into d4 here, because if knight then comes knight into d5, if you grab the queen, let's say knight into f3, then knight into b6 is very strong. The bishop on d6 is hanging, and we'll grab that, and now one of the two knights will be lost. And if after rook h3 and we have knight into d4 and knight into d5, you capture the knight, queen to d5 is very strong. The threat is that if the knight moves, then the bishop will be en prise. The rook is also attacking it. So bishop e5 would have to be played, and then f4. It goes into a very complicated and sharp line. Queen c6, threatening c2 as well as exchanging queens. So queen g2 will exchange on our terms. Queen in2 and bishop in2. And if takes, you can take on c7. That bishop still has no place to go. Knight c5 can come to threaten that bishop, but rook to e3 will pin that bishop even. And black is going to lose a lot of material. You castle, rook takes e5, and you will capture on d4 next. And you capture on d4. Rook has to move back. White is up a pawn. White has a bishop for a knight, and the rooks are very well placed. The h pawns and the g pawns are quite advanced. The f pawn is quite advanced. So white is very happy in this position and probably will gobble up the a pawn for black as well. So after rook h3, you'll have to do something like knight e7. Clear the path of the c8 rook and reroute the knight to f5. Knight a2 and knight f5. And you can play queen g4, preparing the swinging of the rook. g6, let's say, h5, rook f8, and then rook b3. And you put pressure in this way. The queen moves and you play bishop d3. This could be a very interesting way to play, and white certainly would be better. You could eventually think of giving up that bishop for that knight, trying to create some weaknesses, and black can't castle anymore. So this would be one way to play it, but bishop h3 was played instead. And this is a bit different because this allows knight into d4. And here, if knight into d5, black can throw in queen into b2. And after you capture white's queen. And there is no rook on h3 to capture that knight back. So this is possible now. So after knight into d4, queen e3 was played. Knight b5 would be perfectly fine. You offered a queen trade. You are threatening some discoveries as well. So knight to d5, let's say, attacking the queen, and queen c6, attack on e4 or on c2. So queen e4. Then there's an interesting idea with bishop into a3. And of course, there is no b into a3 because queen into d5, and this would be better for black actually. So white would have to play very solidly, let's say, with rook hg1, and this is balanced for both sides. Black has some counterplay, certainly. But bishop e5 was played instead. This simply allows f4. Now some material has to be given up. Rook into c3, queen into c3, and now knight b5. This is not as good as playing knight b5 previously. Queen goes to f3, and bishop comes to d4. King to a2, not allowing any knight into a3 ideas. g6, h5. Knight to c5, bishop to f1. The bishop was not doing much on h3 now. It was blocked in, so we'll try to maybe exchange it. Knight to e4 and bishop into b5. A takes, h takes g6, f takes because the h pawn was pinned, and rook he1. And it's a tough position for black to play, and perhaps black really miscalculated with rook f8, but simply queen d3. And it was here that black resigned because the bishop is under threat, and if the bishop were to move, let's say, we have rook into e4, and that threat of queen d7 is too strong, so one of the two pieces will be lost, and black already had given up the exchange, so black would be down a rook. And a very nice victory for Alireza Firouzja. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon for the next game.